The desert can be really brutal. I've never lived in a desert, but I've seen enough nature shows to know how bad it can be. The deserts can be severely lacking in moisture. They can be overwhelming, overbearing in heat and in sun. There can be sandstorms, blistering wind. It's an unforgiving landscape. And while maybe very few of us in the end will live in a desert, probably almost all of us will go through other kinds of deserts, more internal deserts, like a relational desert where we might be experiencing a great amount of loneliness or conflict in a relationship. We might experience emotional deserts where we're experiencing a lot of depression or anger or sadness. Or we might experience even spiritual deserts where it feels like God is so far away and my prayer life is dry and it's painful. So, whatever our desert might be, it's good for us to look at the scriptures because the scriptures will help us to navigate all of these deserts because the desert wilderness is a pretty common theme in the Bible. Maybe the most profound example of this comes from the book of Exodus, right there early on in the scriptures. The story of how God delivers his people from slavery in Egypt. He is delivering them from a literal slavery, a physical slavery from an oppressive people, but he's also liberating them interiorly. He's freeing them from idolatry. He's freeing them to enter into a relationship of love with himself. And he promises them deliverance. He promises them a land. So the desert is a means to an end. They're going to flee into the desert, but they're not always going to remain there in the desert. But the desert ends up being a really rough experience for them. We see them struggling with a lack of water, a lack of food. The people complain a lot in the book of Exodus. It was a tough several decades. There's times when they turn completely against Moses, who has been leading them this whole time. They turn against God. They're living in this fear that God is going to abandon them. And sometimes they even expect that they're just going to die in the desert, that this is it for them. Now, all of that's not a bad description of kind of how I deal with my own deserts. There's times when I feel like I'm also lacking the strength, the sustenance that I need to get through this thing. I might spend a lot of time complaining because I'm unhappy about what I'm going through. I might, in some ways, turn against the people who love me. I might even turn against God at times. I might struggle with this fear that God's going to abandon me. And honestly, sometimes in the desert, it feels like this is just never going to end. I'm always going to be stuck in this experience. And yet, the desert is never all bad. If you look at that story of Exodus, it's clear that it was a special time for God's people as well. It wasn't just a time of suffering and difficulty. We see that while they were maybe experiencing a lack of food or water, God provided for them in miraculous ways. And God was always there guiding them. He was always there protecting them. As much as maybe God should have, he never gave up on them in spite of their own infidelity, their own breaking of the covenant with God. He saves them multiple times from their enemies. He speaks to them. He gives them his word in the Ten Commandments. And he leads them to a home of their own. Really, the desert is this place where God showed his love for his people. And it was a place where his people learned how to love him in return. So when we are going through a desert time in our own life, we need to remember that it's not all bad. The desert wilderness is the place where God is sometimes. And it's honestly the place where he likes to do some of his best work. Your transformation will be profound in the desert. And you will see that when you get to the other side of the desert. God bless you.